The 2010 Atlanta Press Club Debates, brought to you from Georgia Public Broadcasting. The Republican race for Public Service Commission, District 2.
Good evening, everyone. I'm David Zelski, reporter and producer for Georgia Public Broadcasting. Welcome to our 2010 primary election campaign debates originating from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. Today's debate is organized by the Atlanta Press Club. Now let's meet the Republican candidates facing each other in the Public Service Commission District 2 primary election. They are in alphabetical order. Joey Brush, he's a builder and developer. John Douglas is a retired Army officer. Tim Echols is a nonprofit executive. And Jeff May is a business owner. Now here's the format for today's debate. In the first round, each candidate will answer a question from our three panelists. In the second round, the candidates will ask a question of one of their opponents. Each candidate will have time for rebuttal in this round. And in the third round, the panelists will continue questioning the candidates. Finally, each candidate will have 60 seconds to make a closing statement. Now, before we get started, let's meet our three panelists selected by the Atlanta Press Club. First, we have Gene Bonner, who is a freelance journalist. Then we have Scott Hudson. He's an investigative reporter for WGAC Radio. And our third panelist is Margaret Newkirk of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thank you for being here, everybody. Now let's get started with the debate. In the first round, each candidate will be asked a question by one of our panelists. The candidates will have 60 seconds to answer each question. As moderator, I will determine if a rebuttal is necessary. Now, by random selection, Joey Brush gets the first question from Gene Bonner.
Good afternoon. Mr. Brush, it appears that you do not have a website. Is that the case as of yesterday? And also, we had trouble finding a phone number for you on filings. Is there anything that you can tell us about that?
No, other than we've been very busy. Before qualifying week, no intention of running for this office. No. So we've had a lot to do in a few days, and we're trying to get the website should be up in the next few days. We've been working on it. We thought about putting just a bare page up, but we're trying to get some of the substance on there. As far as the phone number, that's easy if you want it. 706-840-2403 is the phone number for all of you out there. But it's just been a lot of work in a short period of time. This is a big state to cover, and we're trying to get the message out and talk about the issues of the Public Service Commission and trying to get a staff put together to do the other things we need to do.
All right, Scott Hudson, you are next. You have a question for Jeff May.
Yes, Mr. May, many municipalities across the state of Georgia are beginning to realize that they have quite a few different ways that are to process or make energy that is non-traditional, such as using methane out of their landfills, converting that to compressed natural gas. We've got quite a few rivers that have strong currents, using that as ways to make energy. There are about 30 states right now that have gone to a private market-based, what they're calling renewable energy portfolio standards. And my question is, do you support this, and why or why not?
Absolutely. I think, you know, if you go to my website, which is up, by the way, I support all of the above, you know, whether it's nuclear or clean coal, natural gas, but definitely renewables. I mean, in Georgia, for instance, you know, we're, as Eric Johnson put it, the Saudi Arabia of pine trees, and biomass could be huge economically for this state. So I definitely support alternatives, whether it be solar, wind, hydro, whatever we can use. We need to utilize every form of energy available.
Okay, next up is Margaret Newkirk. It is your turn to ask a question of Tim Echols.
Mr. Echols, you're the only candidate in the race who has never run for elected office before. What kind of qualifications can you bring to the job?
Well, I think in this election cycle, not being an office holder is probably an advantage, given what's happened to elected officials around this country and some special elections leading up to now. But, you know, the Public Service Commission is information intensive. And I've got 2 master's degrees from the University of Georgia. And certainly I'm up for any kind of academic challenge that we may have. But I think most important for me is that I'm not beholden to any special interest or utilities in this state. So I feel like I'm going to be objective. I'm going to be able to stand strong and be a conservative watchdog for consumers in our state.
Okay, Gene Bonner, you have the final question of this round. That is for John Douglas.
Mr. Douglas, you're a
I
retired.
was hoping I'd get the next question.
You're a retired Army officer. What experience do you have dealing with utilities? Obviously, the Service Commission, you are regulating utilities.
I've served in the legislature for the past 8 years, 2 years in the House and 6 years in the Senate, and we've had a number of bills come through the legislature during that time period that dealt with the Public Service Commission, dealt with utilizing resources, encouraging the use of all of our resources, encouraging the beginning of the biofuel industry in this state, encouraging offshore drilling. I've supported every one of those pieces of legislation. I've also, kept tabs with the Public Service Commission and have talked to the 5 members extensively. I think that experience matters. I think that we need to have somebody over there that's not just hitting the door for the first time. As you mentioned, I did serve a full career in the Army and wore the uniform of our country for many years. That gave me a chance to go around the world and see how things are done in other places. I think I'm ready on day one to serve the people of this state.
All right, well, that concludes round 1. It is now time for our candidates to ask a question of one of their opponents. Now, each of y'all have 30 seconds for the question and 60 seconds to respond and 30 seconds for a rebuttal. Now, by random selection, Tim Echols asked the first question of one of his opponents. Tim.
Thank you, Senator Douglas. As I travel the state, folks seem to be upset with politics as usual. And in looking over your campaign disclosures from the last number of years and the disclosures from lobbyists who hang around the Capitol, it appears that you've taken a lot of money from people that you now want to regulate. What will you do to assure Georgians that you will be objective if you get elected to this position, and to assure Georgians that these entities haven't made a down payment on you as a commissioner?
Tim, I think that's a great question. 6 times over the past 6 years, I've been named Senator of the Year by different groups because of my expertise in various areas and my ability to dig down into the fine print and to find out what's actually going on. And I'm here to tell you that 2 more of those are coming, so we'll have a total of 8 here after this year, after these are announced here in the next week or so. So, you don't get to be Senator of the Year, Tim, by being somebody's lapdog, or by being, lazy or not paying attention to what's going on. So I think if the people of this state want somebody that has a proven track record of going down into the fine print, of somebody who's going to do the work that they expect to be done at the PSC, then John Douglas is their candidate.
Mr. Echols, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Would you be willing to return all of those contributions and all of those meals and goodies that you've been given over the last 8 years as a show of good faith to the people of Georgia?
Well, Tim, I think that coming from the Oxendine campaign,
I'm going to have to stop y'all there. We're going to have to say that you can't ask a second question, so I apologize for not being able to answer. This round, you can ask a question, answer, and rebut. So from now on, we'll just have to follow that pattern. You actually have the next question, so you're up for that, and you can answer that with your 30 seconds there.
Well, am I on now?
You are on.
Okay. I think that the people of this state, what you just heard, I think the people of this state are tired of candidates cutting each other down and slicing and dicing, and so I think they're more interested in what I'm going to do and where I want to take this position that I'm running for at the PSC. I don't think they want to hear us setting any traps again like we just saw. I don't think they want to see us trying to build ourselves up on somebody else. My goal is to make my campaign look good based on what I want to do and what I want to accomplish at the PSC. So I'm going to concentrate on what I'm going to do and respectfully pass on asking a question.
Okay. He chooses to pass. Joey Brush, you may ask a question of one of your opponents.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Echols. All of us have talked about the cap and trade, the Waxman-Markey bill, and all of us have been opposed to that and discussed that in depth. I think this is much more detailed, though. What would you do, not considering the Attorney General filing lawsuit, but what would you do as a Public Service Commission in the interim while the lawsuit was going on that's best for the consumers to work through that process if Waxman-Markey does pass?
Well, I think I'm going to be traveling to Washington, D.C. on the days that I'm not in my office at the Capitol and joining and letting my voice join in with public service commissioners from around this country and put together our resources and be able to speak out against this thing. There are other people just like the Public Service Commission in Georgia that meet together regularly, and And as they come together in Washington, D.C., they can testify before the Congress, testify before the Senate, and I think Georgia needs to be represented there by someone on the Public Service Commission, and I certainly plan to be in Washington, D.C., representing our folks to make sure that we get everything coming to us, and we certainly don't need cap and trade coming to us.
Mr. Brush, you have 30 seconds to respond.
Yes, I'd like to say that I think as a Public Service Commission, we've got to be prepared in more than the strategy of how to do it, but the nuts and bolts. We've got to move our nuclear as fast as possible. We've got to look at the smart grid. We've got to look at the renewables and how we can foster that and implement those kind of fuels right away to be prepared one way or another rather than politics.
Okay, and there is one more question. Jeff May, you now have a question of one of your opponents.
Thank you very much. Contrary to what you may believe, we actually all do have a very good relationship on the campaign trails. We see each other around. So my question is a very friendly question. I have been a small business owner for the last 17 years, and I know that one of my opponents has been in construction and another one is retired military. But Mr. Echols, I'm just curious, what do you actually do in the real world?
Well, I started a nonprofit program at the Georgia Capitol in 1994 that's spread now to almost 40 states around the country, and I've given the last 15 years of my life in the nonprofit sector to training young people to appreciate their country, their parents, their government, understanding how the legislative process works, the role that journalists play, the importance of lobbyists at the Capitol and what role they should play. And I've trained these young people from Alaska to Maine, to Hawaii, and it's been really the joy of my life to do that because I think the nonprofit sector is such an important part of our economy that's often underestimated. And certainly with a master's degree in nonprofit organizations and a master's degree in journalism, I have a great appreciation for those things. But of course, my family owned Bishop Brothers Auto Auction, Echols Brothers House Movers. We got a pickle business. We are small business people, and we're going to stand up for small business people on this Public Service Commission.
Mr. May, you have 30 seconds.
I have nothing.
All right, he chooses to pass, and that concludes our second round of questioning. For those who may be joining us, our program in progress, this is the debate among the candidates for the Public Service Commission District 2 and the Republican primary. Now, for our third round, we return to our panel of distinguished journalists who will ask questions of the candidate of his or her choice. Candidates will be allowed 1 minute to respond, and as moderator, I will determine if an opposing candidate will be given these 30 seconds needed for rebuttal. Now, we begin this round with a question from Scott Hudson.
This question is for Mr. Brush.
Yes.
As a developer, you've probably heard in the Columbia County area, actually it's the Lincoln County area, a lot of land was taken by a developer, sold before any development actually occurred, on the promise utilities would be placed into these areas. It never happened. These folks are now holding land, and we know it was not your development company that did this, for the record.
Thank you.
These folks are now holding land that there's no electricity, no sewer lines, nothing. As a commissioner, do you believe that or if you become a commissioner rather, do you believe that that body should be placing regulations on developers to make them either put those infrastructure in or give their money back if that does not occur?
Well, I can tell you as a developer or as any businessman out there, business person in this day and age, we are regulated, much regulated. There is a list of regulations we have to go through from all kind of, one set of development plans for a project has to be signed off by approximately 40 different agencies from city, county, state, and feds. I don't think we need any more regulation. In this case, I believe that the developer went bankrupt or filed bankruptcy, so I don't know if there was much of anything you could do other than lawsuits and that if there was possibility of that. But I don't think we need more regulation. I think most of the developers and builders in this state are good and want to do the right thing and are trying to do the right thing, and one person coming up like that and trying to sell some snake oil to some people is not a reason to bring a few more regulations on them.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. That is from Margaret Newkirk. Margaret.
Mr. May, the Governor's Office of Consumer Affairs no longer has a budget or a staff. Do you feel that consumers right now are getting a good shake at the PSC?
Are you referring to the CUC that was defunded?
Mm-hmm.
I think that there, and again, it's on my website, there are groups that, purport to look out after the consumer, AARP and some other organizations that are consumer watchdogs. I think, however, that a good commissioner, first of all, will look out for the consumer. And as a business owner, I understand the business side of it, and as a small business owner and a consumer, I understand the consumer aspect of it as well. A good commissioner is one that will help find the balance in the middle that allows the business to be viable, but also doesn't take advantage of the consumer. So the commissioner, him or herself, should be the watchdog. Now, that said, I think that when funding is available, I personally would like to see it restored for the CUC to make sure that, just as an extra added safeguard, just to make sure, trust but verify.
Okay, next question comes from Jean Bonner. Jean.
Yes, this is a question for Mr. Echols. Is there a recent PSC decision that you disagree with? And if so, can you talk about that a little?
Well, one of the things that the PSC regulates that's not that well known is transportation. Limousines, charter buses, and household movers. And I would really like to see the Public Service Commission beef up their enforcement of rogue or black market people in this transportation industry. We have a lot of it here in Atlanta, especially with household movers. But the Public Service Commission continues to have a staff of about 2 people to be able to enforce this statewide. It's not enough. And as a result of that, good business people who are playing by the rules, who are paying all the license fees and getting all the liability insurance, these people are being penalized by those that are cheating the system. And certainly if I have anything to do with it, we're going to beef up enforcement, and we're going to go after folks that are cheating. We have too much of that in our state, in our city here, in our country, and the Public Services Commission has the authority to enforce, and we must do it.
All right, next question is from Scott Hudson.
Mr. Douglas, let's assume that cap and trade passes. Do you believe that the citizens and the state of Georgia then have standing in some way to sue the federal government over this, and would you support such a move?
Absolutely. We set a precedent this year with Senate Bill 411, where we voted to not require people in this state to buy health insurance. We told the federal government we're not going to require that in Georgia because there's nowhere in the Constitution that say we have to do that. Cap and trade comes along. What that would do basically is it would eliminate the use of clean coal to generate electricity in this state, which is 2/3 of how we get our electricity. Your rates would go up about $3,000 per residential household. We need the legislature and the governor and a Republican attorney general to give us the tools at the Public Service Commission to be able to stand up to Washington and say, no, we're not going to do that. It's not in the Constitution that you can tell us which energy sources to use to generate our electricity, and we're not going to eliminate the use of coal in this state to do it. And if you want to take us to court, let's go.
Okay, next question is from Margaret Newkirk. Margaret.
Mr. Brush.
Yes, ma'am.
You had spoken earlier about renewables and the entire portfolio of energy you'd like to see. Georgia, in fact, lags other southeastern states. What could you do as a commissioner to have us catch up to North Carolina or Florida or one of these states that's so far ahead of us now?
Well, I think there's several things we can do, Margaret, and thank you for the question. We get 80% of our electric energy outside the state of Georgia now, which costs a lot of money and takes a lot of money out of the state of Georgia, which would be useful here. As a Public Service Commission, I don't think we need to wait on Waxman-Markey bill or cap and trade, whether it passes or doesn't pass. We need to start working on this now within the industry to bring costs down, because the only way we're going to bring rates down is bring the cost down. We need to speed up our nuclear program and get it online. We need to look at these renewables where we can. We've got some exciting things in solar energy, particularly in the individual home and building market, in bringing that online, of buyback routines and things like that to the power company. The biofuels has a great possibility of bringing there. Even the wind in some certain applications all need to be looked at and incentivized where the developers and the builders can bring it to the people.
Okay. Next question is from Jean Bonner. Jean.
Mr. May, Senate Bill 31 passed in 2009, and one of the provisions is that it allowed Georgia Power to charge in advance. Would you say that that is consumer friendly?
That's a good question. Senate Bill 31 passed a couple years ago. allows for pre-funding of the 2 nuclear reactors. Now, that ultimately will save the consumer about $300 million, and that's under the assumption that the cost schedule is accurate and on time. Now, that said, I would like to, so while not everyone agrees on that piece of legislation, I think anytime we can save the consumers and the ratepayers who are ultimately going to pay for it money, I think it's a good idea. Now, with regard to a cap and tax, as chairman of the Energy Subcommittee of EUT, I stopped, in effect, cap and tax in Georgia. A representative brought to our committee what would have wanted to outlaw clean coal in Georgia. And I told her, I said, ma'am, with all due respect, I have a difficult time outlawing the source of over 60% of the energy in this state. Now, I definitely think that we need to look at renewables and alternative fuel sources. However, until we have the infrastructure and mechanism in place to deliver that commodity, we have to use what we have available.
And on that Senate Bill 31, I'm going to give the rest of you 30 seconds to answer this one, because that is something that directly affects the consumers. So we'll give each of you 30 seconds, starting with you, Mr. Brush, on Senate Bill 31. And what kind of precedents does that set for consumers when it comes to doing this advanced charge?
Well, I think I think you have to face Senate Bill 31, and I supported Senate Bill 31, though I wasn't in the Senate that time. I supported Senate Bill 31 because I believe it will advance and speed up the getting online of the 2 nuclear reactors at Plant Vogtle. This will save the consumers of Georgia money and will bring it in the long run. We can bring our percentage of our electric generation from 21% to a much higher degree, and therefore the fuels we're buying from outside the state, 80%, as I told you, the fuel we're buying there, we can decrease that.
All right, Mr. Douglas, same question.
I don't think it's a precedent, because this commissioner, when I get there, will take each case on its own merits. What I am a very, very strong advocate of nuclear power. It's clean, safe, and efficient. It's the wave of the future. It's here. It's good for Georgia, and I think that we need to make sure that we have enough of it here and move forward with nuclear power, as we should with the other resources that we have available. Solar and wind don't work here. They're not cost effective, no matter what they say in Washington. Nuclear does, and let's move forward with it.
Okay, Mr. Echols, same question, your response on Senate Bill 31.
Well, I have to disagree with all of these guys on this. And, you know, that week when that bill passed, Georgia Power had about 90 lobbyists at the Capitol. And both of my opponents on my right and left voted for that. And I have to disagree, because it's a fundamental definition between a consumer and a shareholder. And in this instance, I believe Georgia Power shareholders should have bore the burden of that pre-investment, not the consumers of Georgia. I think it was a mistake.
Okay, since Mr. May and Douglas were brought up in that, I'm going to give them each 30 seconds to rebut.
First of all, let me say, energy independence is a national security issue. We need to do everything we can to reduce our dependence on foreign oil and foreign energy. Now, that said, while nuclear may be expensive on the front end because of the cost of construction, the cost per kilowatt hour of nuclear is about ½ cent. The cost of coal is about 4.12 cents per kilowatt hour, and the cost of oil and gas is about 5.3 cents. So, in the long run, nuclear will ultimately be cheaper than coal or natural gas. So, I think we need to plan for the future, because energy independence is not a drive-through service. Energy policy is not drive-through service. You have to plan and prepare for it.
Okay, Mr. Douglas.
You know, it's very easy, Tim, to be on the outside and not have to make important decisions and never to have to vote on anything, you know, and just be critical. But Senate Bill 31 was good for Georgia because, again, nuclear power is here. It's safe, efficient. It's not some voodoo power source like they want us to use in Washington. We need to move forward with it. That was the way to do it. I voted for 31, and I'm glad that I did. And we look forward to generating more of our electricity through the use of nuclear power.
Mr. Echols, you were brought up. I'm giving you 15 seconds to mention.
Well, thank you. I am pro-nuclear power. I was at Plant Vogtle last Monday for a 3-hour inspection. I'm all about nuclear power. It wasn't a vote about nuclear power. It was a vote about pre-charging Georgia consumers. And we don't need to pre-charge our consumers until the project is done.
Okay, let's move back to our panelists over here. Scott Hudson, you have the next question.
Okay, this question is really a yes or no question, and it's for all 4 of you. And it may sound like this is coming out of left field, so before I ask the question, let me explain. Most people don't realize how important the PSC and its decisions are to their daily lives. They don't realize that you help control what's in the figure in that bill that they get every month. They also don't realize how beholden the state and the PSC is to the federal government and its regulations and its laws. So my question is, do you support the repeal of the 17th Amendment?
Each one of you have 30 seconds for this. Starting with Mr. Brush.
Yes or no?
Yes or no?
No.
Mr. Douglas.
You know, I'm a student of American history, and I'm not sure what the 17th Amendment has to do with the Public Service Commission.
It would give the senator back to the state as opposed to
Yeah, I understand what the
elected.
amendment is. It provided for popular election of U.S. senators.
Well, I guess another way to ask the question is, do you believe that the state, which the PSC is a part
Should the
of,
state legislature start appointing U.S. senators? Is that what you're asking?
should they have more representatives or representation in the federal government?
You know, I'm a big believer in the 10th Amendment, if that's what you're asking, and certainly the state needs to, the federal government needs to return power to the states. So if you're asking about the 10th Amendment instead of the 17th, then certainly I'm in favor of expanding the 10th Amendment, yes.
But that's not what I was asking. I asked the 17th.
Well, I don't see the correlation between, as a student of American history, I don't see the correlation between the legislature voting for, the state Senate voting for the U.S. senators and the Public Service Commission. So I'll just tell you, I don't see the connection.
Okay, we'll move on to Mr. Echols.
I don't think it's the right time to address the 17th Amendment. Let's pass the Human Life Amendment. Let's pass a balanced budget amendment, but not the 17th right now.
Mr. May.
I just happen to have my copy of the Constitution with me, so I looked it up to see exactly what it was. And it's an interesting question. I think I trust that the majority of what the framers of the Constitution had in mind was the right thing to do at the time. What they didn't want was an overburdensome, overpowerful federal government. And right now, the people have a voice in the House of Representatives. The states in D.C. don't currently have a voice. And you know, if the majority of if 2/3 of the people in this country wish to see that repealed, I'm all for it.
And I apologize at the top, I didn't mention that props are not allowed of any kind, no matter how important they are. So from here on out, that was not said, so of course it's forgivable. Margaret Newkirk, you have the next question.
Trying to decide.
I'll be going last every question.
Mr. Douglas.
Thank you.
Utilities in Georgia have been known to entertain regulators, take them to the games and take them to dinner. What would you do if you were invited to sit in a Braves box or something?
You know, when you're on the Public Service Commission and you have a direct now role in controlling what they can charge their rates, for their rates, what they can do, where they can string their lines, all that stuff. When you have a direct impact on that, you're going to have to curtail that stuff significantly. I mean, you can't expect somebody to sit in the Braves box and chummy with the executives of a utility company and then the next day vote against them. It just doesn't work that way. So the you know, that sort of thing should be, I think, very sharply curtailed.
Okay, let's move on to another question from Jean Bonner. Jean.
May I ask Mr. Douglas a question?
You may ask
Okay,
whoever you'd like.
You obviously deal with a lot of, you must know the executives at some of the utilities that you would be monitoring, and obviously you know a lot of legislators as yourself as a legislator. I feel at times there can be groupthink in a lot of commissions, as much as it should be a group of individuals who individually make a decision. You do see a lot of groupthink. How would you describe your relationship with the current members of the PSC?
I know them from a distance. I've just gotten to know them better since I've been running for PSC. But frankly, the legislature, you know, has its own area of interest, and the PSC has their area of interest. And there's, except when we're legislating bills that directly impact on the PSC, there's not a whole lot of interaction between the PSC and the General Assembly. You know, and I've never been to dinner with any of them or anything like that.
Okay, Scott Hudson, you have the next question.
Okay. We'll make this question for Mr. Echols. Right now, before the PFC, there is a request for funding between $25 and $75 million to build a pipeline that really would only service just one basic customer, which is a very large resort, hotel, golf course. That's come under fire from consumer advocates. If you were sitting on the commission right now, would you vote for or against such a use of state money?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of intricacies involved with that pipeline, and I I have talked to both sides of the folks already, both Atlanta Gas Light and the local people there. So it's not as simple as it appears, and certainly the coverage in the newspaper kind of demonized the Ritz-Carlton folks and the folks at Reynolds Plantation. And I think there is this tendency in our country to go after the rich and demonize them and somehow say that having wealth is bad for the country. So I don't adhere to that philosophy. But if this project can be done cheaper by the local company, then we need to do it. We need to allow them to do it. And the estimates are they can do it for $3 or $4 million. We need to let them do it. If there's some advantages to having Georgia consumers be able to reap the benefits of the longer pipeline, then we should do that.
Margaret Newkirk, next question for you.
Mr. May, before any of you take office, there will be significant rate increases for both Georgia Power and Atlanta Gas Light. As a commissioner, what do you think you can do to hold the line on rates, which have been going up, particularly with Georgia Power, fairly steadily?
That's a great question, and I truly feel that that's where my background comes into play and is very, very helpful. As a business owner for the last 17 years, I understand the industry side. I understand what it's like to make a payroll, and I know that these utilities have to remain viable business entities. On the other side, as the consumer and the small business, and given that small businesses create 7 out of every 10 new jobs in this state and this country, it's imperative and important that we make sure that they're not taken advantage of. They need to be able to afford to employ people. So my experience on both sides and also being in the legislature allows me to come to the middle and find the balance of what is appropriate and what is feasible and what can people afford to pay. Now, again, we still need to make sure that we plan for the future, and that does come at some additional cost. With regard to the question about the pipeline, I actually passed legislation a couple years ago to allow municipal gas companies to extend their territory to provide natural gas service in rural areas because they were fined $100,000 by the PSC for doing so.
Okay, and we have one more question before we move on to our final round. That is from Jean Bonner. Jean.
Mr. Brush, question for you. You are a builder, and you mentioned smart grid technology in one of your previous answers, and obviously that would have implications for residents and potentially for builders. Can I ask, could you expand a little bit on your thoughts on smart grid technology and how Georgia can better take advantage of this emerging technology?
Absolutely, Gene. Thank you for that. I am a builder, but that's not where I've always been. I have a degree in engineering, and I served as a construction engineer at Plant Vogel's Unit 1 and 2. So I'm the only one that's worked in the energy business at all and understand this. I think the PSC has a unique opportunity to bring all parties together, from academia, from the providers, from the consumers, to look at these things. As far as smart grid, there's some exciting technology, and what that does is a grid system. It lays over the grid system we have now, and it lets, by the meter, consumers talk to the provider, and the provider talk to the consumer about what peak demands, what non-peak demands, what their uses are going to be, and it allows us to build a grid system, not expand it like we do now at peak demand. All the infrastructure has to be to handle that, which would lower, according to DOE, could lower our peak demand structures by approximately 20%.
Okay, unfortunately, we have no more time for questions. So each of the Republican candidates in this primary will have a chance for 60 seconds for a closing statement. It was randomly selected, and Tim Echols was selected to make the first statement. Mr. Echols.
Great. We are blessed to live in a fantastic state. I've lived in Georgia all my life, and we have reliable energy here in Georgia at a relatively low cost, and we need to make sure that continues. And by electing me to the Public Service Commission, I've pledged not to even take a drink of water from those people that I regulate. I'm not going to greatly curtail it. I'm going to eliminate it. And I'm not going to be cozy with those that I regulate. But we need leadership in this area. We need to move Georgia forward in renewable energy. We have solar hot water heating system manufacturing right in Athens, Georgia. We can help consumers put their toe in the renewable water by converting their home to solar hot water heating system. It's 17% of their energy. We can convert city fleets and counties to natural gas and save using an American resource. So I hope Georgia consumers will elect me to the Public Service Commission, and I'll look forward to serving you well.
Okay, Jeff May, it is now your turn to make your closing statement.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the Atlanta Press Club for putting this event together in GPB. I hope that after this debate, it's clear that I have the background, the experience, the knowledge, and the vision to be the next Public Service Commissioner for the state of Georgia. You know, energy independence is a national security issue. My 3D plan for energy policy in Georgia is clear: diversify, develop, deliver. So please go to my website to find out more about it. It's jeffmayforpsc.com. And I trust if you take a look at that, you'll see that I have the qualifications, the background, and the experience to do the job. I have fought cap and trade in the Georgia House, and I would like to continue to use the PSC as a platform to fight these federal mandates that are being pushed down from Washington that will cost every family in this state between, some estimates, $3,000, some estimates say $6,800 per family per year. Please, I'm asking for your vote and your consideration. Please vote May and July for PSC. Thank you very much.
John Douglas, you have 60 seconds for your closing statement.
Thanks also to Georgia Public Television and the Atlanta Press Club. You know, I'm a native Georgian. I was born in Albany. I've lived in this state my entire life except when I was serving our country in the Army. I think we need to have what I call a ratepayers pledge. We need to slash wasteful spending at the Public Service Commission. We need to enforce the do not call list and to stop telemarketers from taking advantage of senior citizens. We need to ensure that our utility bills are easy to read. We need to make sure you have a live operator when you call the PSC and not some recorded voice. And we need to utilize our natural resources that we have here. I pledge to you hard work. If it's worth having, it's worth working for. Attention to detail, leading by example. Do the same thing in Atlanta that you do at home. And remember that every cent that government spends comes out of your pockets. I'm State Senator John Douglas. I'm the one with the experience. I would appreciate your support for the Public Service Commission on July 20th and beyond.
And our final closing statement comes from Joey Brush.
Thank you. Thank the Atlanta Press Club also. The challenges facing the PSC are larger than any one industry or legislator or regulator or technology. It is much bigger than that. Rising to face these challenges is going to take somebody who can make difficult decisions, somebody who understands intimately the industry that we're seeking to regulate. More than running for Congress or legislators, you've got to understand where we're going and how we're going to get there in this industry. I'm the only one who's worked in the industry, only one who is ready to go to work and understand to lower the cost of energy. If we want to lower the rates, and everybody wants lower rates, we have to lower the cost by diversifying our fuels, quit buying 80% of our fuel outside the state of Georgia, and bring the new technologies on the grid and system and lower our cost. And I would like your vote on July 20th, Joey Brush.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. And that concludes our debate. We'd like to remind the voters that the primary elections will be on June 20th. And many thanks to our candidates and our distinguished panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging today's debate. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club, you may visit atlantapressclub.org. The debates that air on Georgia Public Broadcasting will be archived on the Press Club's website. I'm David Zelsky. Thanks for joining us for this primary election debate.
The Atlanta Press Club debate series is made possible by a donation from the late Tom Watson Brown.